We have been doing a series called In Exile. We're talking about the biblical exiles from Babylon all the way up to the New Testament. Last week we had Rex Hamilton with us, who talked about Jeremiah, who is one of the most unpopular prophets in the Old Testament. He was really an exciting, happy guy. That whenever God gave him a word of prophecy, it usually involved everybody having unhappy things happen to them, and he never followed it up with, but hey, everything's going to be okay in the end if you turn it all around, except that one verse that Rex read last week. But the verse that he read basically said, build homes, plant gardens, plan to stay there because you're going to be there for 70 years, and just get used to it, which is the negative version of what's actually true for us, that it's important for us to not consider how we can get out of our situation or how we can stay away from the world that God's put us in, but how can we engage in it? How can we be a part of it? I think the part of the Jeremiah verse that he was reading last week that I really loved was, he says, pray for the peace of whatever city you are put in, because the welfare of that city will determine your welfare. And we don't think about it that way a lot, right? We think, well, we're going to be okay, but we should pray for our own welfare, and we should pray that God take care of us and destroy everybody else, right? But he says, you are going to live in exile. You're going to go out and you're going to be in but not of. You're going to be in a foreign culture that doesn't serve your God. And so you should pray for the peace of whatever city you find yourself in. You should pray for its welfare. And I think it's a good thing for us to consider praying for the welfare of the city that we're in. This week, I would like to entitle my thoughts, Mobile Home. This is a subject I know a lot about. I grew up in a mobile home. This is one of the words it's two words in the English language that probably should not go together, but we have chosen to put them together. Mobile homes are a great thing. When my dad was in the military, and then he got out of the military, retired when I was about 6 years old. And because of that, we were in the middle of Great Falls, Montana, and he had to find another job. And it turns out that being a paralegal, which is what the military had trained him for, was not a job that he could find a whole lot of work for in Great Falls, Montana. Not a lot of need for 40-something paralegals in the middle of nowhere. And so he looked around for a job, didn't find one, so he ended up going back to school. So we had a house, but we couldn't keep the house because we couldn't afford it, because my dad was in school and working odd jobs and that kind of a thing. So our solution to that was we decided to buy a mobile home as a temporary kind of a situation, and it ended up being a permanent kind of a situation. In fact, I did some Google Maps today. There it is. That is the home I grew up in. Let's see, I have a little laser here. You can't see it. Right in between those two trees, smack in the center. That is the mobile home we bought in the year 1980. It is still standing to this very day, and my mom still lives there. And that is the exact same structure still. So if it looks a little bit like a bunch of box cars in a stockyard, that's a little bit what it felt like, actually. I learned a few things about mobile homes growing up. Our home was mobile, but it never moved. It only moved that one time, and then we took the wheels off and stuck them underneath, and they were there if we ever needed to move it again. But it could have. It could have moved. It was all ready to go. It was a very exciting thing. A few mobile home facts you may not know. To be mobile, a home must by necessity not use standard construction materials like, say, walls with drywall and insulation inside of them, and pretty much any kind of thing that would create any soundproofing in between rooms, right? So instead you have to use thin wood paneling from the 1970s for some reason. There are no secrets in a mobile home. That is what I learned growing up. If you were whispering to someone in the other room, it's likely somebody at the other end was hearing you. If your home's available living space, second thing I learned, is measured in length and width instead of in square footage, you are going to be in a very small living space. This particular home is 14 feet wide by 70 feet long, which if you kind of do the mental thing in your head there, you realize that it is a lot like living in a boxcar or a school bus, roughly, right? It's like a really, really long school bus, but it's really, really narrow. Or a train car. Sometimes imagine we lived in a train car like the boxcar children. I also learned that if you need to climb up on the roof to clean the filters on the swamp cooler, you should wear long pants, because the swamp cooler only needs work when it's hot out, and the roof is made of aluminum. I learned that the hard way. Also, not a lot of people know what a swamp cooler is, and you shouldn't bring it up in conversation. But it's that little box right on top, about three-quarters of the way down, and it works by these filters that have straw in them, and then water comes down and a fan blows on them, and it breaks all the time. I learned that you just can't put a mobile home anywhere you please, even if you own the land sometimes, especially if you live in town. So we gather them in parks. This is both a correct and a tragic misuse of the word park. There's generally nothing park-like in a trailer park. However, you do park your house there, so I guess it's technically correct. This is less funny and more sad the deeper I get into it. People for whom, I learned this very important fact, people for whom the mobility of their home is a high priority sometimes have other questionable priorities. Take, for instance, the common sight that I saw growing up in the mobile home park in Great Falls, Montana, of a well-maintained Camaro with T-tops, right, lovingly polished every couple of days in front of a very poorly maintained yard, home, and possibly offspring, right? This, like a really, really nice Camaro, which sadly, growing up, I thought was a really cool car. And that is another sad thing. Your home being mobile is not necessarily your biggest priority in life, but I was thinking of that, and I was thinking of even if we had ever moved it, it wouldn't have been a great thing. Even the one feature about it that's really nice is that you can move it. It's still, at the end of the day, there you are. I was thinking about us living in exile in the different kinds of worlds that we live in, and thinking about that ability to move your home around and to take your home wherever you go. I was reading in Ephesians chapter 2. I'll read the first part in the Message, and then I'll read the rest in the NIV, so you think that you don't believe that I only read the Bible in the Message. Ephesians chapter 2, verse 19, he says, "That's plain enough, isn't it? You're no longer wandering exiles. The kingdom of faith is now your home country. You're no longer strangers or outsiders. You belong here with as much right to the name Christian as anyone." Ephesians chapter 2, Paul is talking about the fact that Gentiles and Jews are no longer separate, that the Hebrews are no longer the chosen people and everybody else is outside, but Jesus through the cross breaks down the barrier between both of them. And he says, you Ephesians, who are Gentiles by birth, are now no longer outsiders. You're no longer exiles in God's country. You're no longer foreigners and strangers, but you are brought together with God's people and you belong. In the NIV it says, "Consequently, you're no longer foreigners and strangers, but fellow citizens with God's people and also members of his household, built on the foundation of the apostles and prophets, with Christ Jesus himself, the chief cornerstone." He's making a metaphor here. He's talking about a building. "In him, the whole building is joined together and rises to become a holy temple in the Lord. And in him, you too are being built together to become a dwelling in which God lives by his Spirit." And Paul is writing to the Gentiles who some Jews had questioned, including in the faith, but he says, you're being built into one house, into God's house. And even though you may find yourself in cultures and in cities and in places where your faith isn't prevalent, you have a home. You are part of God's house. And in fact, God's house isn't a matter of a building or a place, but God's house is built of all of God's people. And that's important because it establishes this new reality that the temple, the physical temple that the Jews worshiped in, is not God's house anymore. We are. And I think this is probably hard for the Hebrews. It's difficult because they've grown up believing and knowing that God lives in the temple. In fact, he inhabits at different times the Ark of the Covenant, which is the box which is behind all of the veils and the doors and the courts and all of the things that separate it from people. And the presence of God, where God is a physical place. And so if you wanted to be close to God, you needed to go to Jerusalem, and you would take a pilgrimage, and you would go there to worship. And that was where you could be really close to God. And even the Hebrew Christians, after they become Christians, still in Jerusalem, meet together in the courts of the temple. That's central to their faith. It's where they go if they were going to talk about Jesus, and then they would meet in homes. And as they're persecuted and spread out from Jerusalem, now they're further and farther away from the temple. They're further and further away from the central house. And there's synagogues in all of the different communities, so they had synagogues to go meet at, but they still had this kind of, central building philosophy of the synagogue. And yet Paul is laying this out and saying, the center of worship is actually no longer the temple or the synagogue, or for us, the church building. It's in your heart. It is you, that wherever you go, the house of God goes with you. It is truly mobile. It gets up and goes with you. Thus my thin metaphor. All right, good. That wherever you go, wherever you are, that is where God lives. That is where God dwells. And because of that, then wherever you are, no matter what culture you're in and no matter what it feels like about your faith, home and God's house is actually with you. But as hard as it was for the Jews to understand that, it's just as hard for us to understand that sometimes too. We tend to associate Jesus with boxes. We tend to put God into boxes. There's the tabernacle in the wilderness, and then there's the temple, and there's the Ark of the Covenant. And then we try to keep God in our church boxes too, because it makes sense for us for some reason to have this central point where we go and we say, okay, this is the God place. Gungor is a kind of alt worship group, Michael Gungor and I think his wife. They wrote a song called Cant Keep You, which I like, that talks about this, about our tendency to try to keep Jesus in boxes. They tried to keep you in a tent. They could not keep you in a temple or any of their idols to see and understand. They could not keep you in their walls. We cannot keep you in ours either, for you are so much greater. Who is like the Lord? We've tried to keep you in our tents. We've tried to keep you in our temples. We've worshiped all our idols, and we want all that to end. So we will find you in the streets, and we will find you in the prisons, and even in our Bibles and churches. And this idea that God is with us, and that wherever we are, and therefore wherever God is, that is the central place of worship, that is home, is hard to grasp, but it's revolutionary and transforming for us if we get it, if we understand it, and if we become aware of it beyond a night like tonight. So we come tonight and we worship and we partake of communion together, and we think about Jesus, and then we'll go home and we'll go to bed and we'll get up tomorrow and we'll not be in a place that's dedicated to worship, but we'll go to our homes, or we'll go to our work, or we'll go to school, or wherever it is that we have to go during the week. And Jesus says that you are his home, and that wherever you go, he goes with you. And Jesus said in Matthew 28:20, surely I'm with you always to the very end of the age. The very last thing that Jesus says before he ascends is, go and make disciples. And his last words were, and surely I am with you always, even to the very end of the age, to the end of the world, I'll be with you. Matthew chapter 18, verse 19, Jesus said, again, I truly tell you that if two of you on earth agree about anything they ask for, it will be done for them by my Father in heaven. For where two or three gather in my name, there am I with them. And we sometimes use this verse to say, well, we need at least two people to form a quorum so that our prayers work better, or make some sort of magical formula about this. But in reality, what Jesus is saying, it's wherever you go, I am with you. And if you pray and if you agree and if you ask for anything, I am listening. And my Father goes into action when you say yes or no about anything. That's the kind of connection that Jesus says that we have with him. And that works not only here at church, it works not only in our home, in private, but it works everywhere that we go. That Jesus is with us, that the house of God is with us, that we take that with us to our work and our school and our home and our community, and to people who know him and people who don't. So we're no longer exiles or strangers. We're home. No matter how foreign or hostile the situation is, we carry our home in our hearts. It comes along with us. And Jesus walks with you. And so the key is to be aware of it, to acknowledge it. As Jesus says, don't be afraid. I am with you. I think it's good for us to not be afraid to do some of the things we might do, knowing that we're in a church, which is a safe place to do spiritual kinds of things. What if those kinds of things were actually a part of our everyday life? If we believe that God's house goes with us, if we believe that God's dwelling, the place where he lives, is actually with us, then would we be afraid to pray on the spot if we needed to give a word of encouragement to someone, to talk about your hope, to talk about Jesus? Can what we call church happen right where we are? If that's possible, then that changes the way that we look at things and we see things. And I think if there's this great divide between the sacred part of your life and the rest of your life, it's possible that you're trying to build the wrong kind of house. And I think all my life, having been in church, I think I've seen this tendency in myself and in others to really say, okay, I need to take care of all of the things in my life. So this is the time I set aside to take care of the God things in my life. And then this is the place that I go to, see my dentist. And this is the place I go to school. And this is the place I go to go to work. And I have all these segments. And the idea of God in us, of Christ in us, of God's making his home in us is something that we put into practice up to a certain point. We might say, well, I want to make sure my home is a safe place for that kind of activity. But what if everywhere I go, I stop and I say, God is with me. He's present. What would Jesus say in this situation? What is Jesus telling me to do in this situation? And as I've been praying about that, and as I've been trying to think about that throughout the day, some interesting things have been happening, and I'll talk to you a little bit more about those in a little bit. But I want to ask this question. Is there a great divide between the sacred part of your life and the rest of your life? Or maybe even a little divide? Are there these moments where you go, well, I'm just not sure it would be appropriate to think and act on Jesus kinds of principles in my life? And what would happen if you began to erode some of those barriers? So table talk tonight. We'll take about 10 minutes to talk about this, and then I have one more thing to share with you at the end. says this: what are some things that you do at church? This is a great question. This is my favorite question of the night. What are some things that you do at church or with church people that you would never do in quote unquote public? That you would not do outside of church, right? Or some things that you would feel odd about, right? If your two worlds collided, if your church world and your not church world, let's just say it that way, collided. And maybe you have a story or two about when that's happened to you. 2, how do you explain church relationships and church events and church things and church in general to outsiders? Does it make any sense to them? Does this come up in conversation? How does that work? What quote-unquote church things need to get outside of the walls of the building? And the most important question there is, how does that happen? Because it's easy to say, well, we should, live by the Spirit and we should be moved by God everywhere we go and everything that we do. Well, how? How does that work? How practically have you seen that happen, or do you theorize maybe that it could happen? So take about 10 minutes and discuss that, and then I have one more thought, and then we'll be done for the night. Well, I hope you had a good discussion. A couple of the things we were just talking about that I thought were really good, some things that happen in the church building, but that maybe should get outside of it, are things like hearing from God. Maybe we can do that here as well as other places. Praying, caring for people. That shouldn't be just a church thing, right? And we do have that open door here at church where we're all supposed to care for each other and love each other, and we're huggy people and all those kinds of things. But what if we extended that beyond just the church world into our everyday life? Serving, giving. What if those things extended beyond these walls? I think it's interesting what happens when your worlds collide, right? When your this world, this church world and this everyday life world sort of run into each other. I don't know if you've ever had that happen. I have that happen all the time, and I had it happen a few different times this week. One was where I was having a conversation with a coworker, and it just, through a series of events, came up that he used to go to church but doesn't go to church anymore because he was kind of burnt out by all the things that were happening. And we talked about it in detail, and I let slip that I'm a pastor, which was a mind blower for him. So that was a lot of fun. But it was a good conversation. This week, I was saying this morning in the service, we have every few months we get together with all the PAC churches, they're parent-affiliated churches that Shoreline supports. There's 2 of them right now. One is the Table and one is the Indonesian church that meets in the morning. So Pastor Bob and Harry from the Indonesian church, Pastor Harry and Pastor Steve, all wanted to get together. And ordinarily they're like, okay, well, let's get together, early in the morning and have breakfast because I've got to go down to Seattle. But this time they said, we could come down to Seattle for lunch. I went, yeah, that sounds like a great idea. Why don't you guys, because they like to get out, and it makes it a lot easier for me if I'm just in Seattle. So I met them at this cool Italian restaurant that's across the street from our office. And I did not know that this was the day that everybody from my office was coming to the cool Italian restaurant, which is... it's hard to explain, but it's essentially like a house, right? It's like being in somebody's living room is the size of the room. It's very, very small. You can fit maybe 15, 20 people in there, but it's really crammed together. Like the tables are tighter than these are. So there I am sitting with my pastor friends, and then like my boss and a bunch of people from work are having work meetings. So like from where you guys are here to the table behind you, is me having the pastor parent affiliated church meeting, and then these guys over here having like work technology meetings, and those 2 worlds just kind of smacked into each other. And I thought it was kind of cool because it wasn't like this weird, awkward thing at all. It was this thing where my boss comes in and says, oh, these are the guys you usually meet with on Wednesdays. Yeah. because he knows about them, and we've talked about it before, and he understands the things that I do and how I volunteer at the church and all those kinds of things. And so I thought about that, and I thought about how your worlds collide sometimes. And I think it's kind of cool when your worlds do collide, that maybe you should sometimes be intentional at making that happen. Because sometimes when somebody in your other life, right, meets somebody from your church life, some conversations can happen that wouldn't normally happen, and it can open up some opportunities. But the other thing I thought about was this: when your worlds collide, it's really important that you be intentional about it, and that you have lived your life in such a way that nobody is really shocked, right? That nobody's really surprised. And I'm finding the thing that I'm most interested in these days is that when somebody says, "Oh, you're a Christian," that's surprising. I want that surprising part to be because they don't think all the negative things they normally think about Christians, and they think only positive things. That's my hope and my prayer. What I want to be sure of is that they're not really surprised because my life doesn't line up with that kind of an ethos, right? So it's important that I live my life in such a way that when those two worlds collide, people walk away going, "Yeah, I guess that makes sense. Yeah, oh, yeah." And they start to put things together and say, I understand now why this person does the things that they do. When your worlds collide, it should explain who you are more and better instead of confuse people. So let's pray. Lord, thanks for the time we've had together tonight to look at your word. Thank you for the opportunities that you've prepared for us this week to show somebody that you love them, that you care about them. I think if we're looking around and if we're aware every day of our life, there are all kinds of chances that we have to be Jesus in skin walking around our communities. And I pray that the things that we do here in church wouldn't be foreign out there in the world. I thank you for the opportunities you've given me lately to just pray with people. I'm thankful that when the right moment to pray with somebody comes up, that you've orchestrated it lately where I seem to be out somewhere where it'd be appropriate to do so. And I just pray for those kinds of opportunities for people. And I pray that those of us here at the table who are looking for chances to be Jesus in the world that we live in, to take God's house with us, to take church, as it were, with us. I pray that you would show us those moments, that you would prompt us by your Spirit. You would tell us, hey, this is the moment right here that I prepared for you to talk to someone, because sometimes it's awkward and sometimes it's inappropriate, and we want to do everything in a way that allows us to live peacefully with everyone around us. So show us when the right moment is to pray for someone, or to talk about the gospel with someone, or to encourage someone through your word. And I pray that you would continue to give us moments where our church life and our regular life collide to the point that it's really hard to tell one from the other. In Jesus' name, amen.